mythology is estimated to have been around for nearly 2,700 years, with the earliest knowledge of these myths appearing in Homer and Hesiod's poems. Books like the Iliad and the Odyssey, estimated to have been written in the 8th century BCE, are the first known pieces of Greek literature. The reason these stories are so prevalent and popular even in present times is because there is deeper hidden meanings behind the fantastical stories about gods and monsters. There are real-life lessons we can learn from these myths. Greek mythology stories taught humanity valuable life lessons and have been passed down through generations to teach the same thing. I have been fascinated by Greek mythology and retellings of these stories since I was a child. I have studied various books, taken college-level classes on mythology, and studied the literature of the Odyssey and Iliad, diving into these hidden meanings behind these stories. First, I will discuss the lesson of love using the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and then I will discuss the lesson of narcissism using the myth of Narcissus and Echo, and finally I will discuss the lesson of greed using the myth of King Midas. Greek mythology stories taught humanity valuable life lessons and have been passed down through generations to teach the same thing. Orpheus and Eurydice is a well-known myth in today's literature. It has a Broadway musical based on it, and several other books have been based on the story to tell the story of the two lovebirds from below. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice is a lesson about love and losing sight of what love is. Orpheus was a muse's son who was a talented musician. The myth says that no god or man could resist his song, and even nature would sway along with the music. He fell in love with a wood nymph named Eurydice at first sight. They decided shortly after meeting to become married, and the god of union even blessed their marriage. He would brag to all the world about how lovely his wife was. However, the myth goes that Orpheus and Eurydice were detested by another man who wanted Eurydice for his own. This man made a deal with the god Hades, the god of death. In exchange for part of his lifetime, the god of death would kill Orpheus. Hades sent a viper snake to bite Orpheus, but the snake found his newlywed wife instead, who was gathering food for herself and Orpheus, because he was working on his music, and it killed her instantly. When Orpheus found his wife, he vowed to venture into the underworld to find her. He traversed through the underworld's treacherous terrain, using his song to make rocks move and let him pass. It was a journey no other man had ever successfully achieved. Once he found Eurydice, he sang a song and convinced Hades to let her go with him back to the overworld. However, Hades stipulated that she would walk right behind him, but he could not turn and look at her or until they were past the barrier into the overworld, or they would return and they would never be able to see each other again. Even in death, Orpheus and Eurydice made it right to the barrier. But doubt set in that Hades had tricked him, and he turned around to make sure she was following right before the barrier. The lesson to be learned from this myth is to trust and have faith in your loved ones and those around you. Orpheus looked back at Eurydice before she was in the sun of the overworld, doubting her promise to follow him, and lost her forever. Orpheus was also neglectful of his wife as he sent her alone to gather food for them, while being too enveloped in his song to attend with her. Had he gone with her, he may have caught the snake, or it would have found him instead. The myth also warns about bragging, as it is the reason the man sent the snake after Orpheus, which killed his wife instead. The story is similar in ways to the next myth, focusing on Narcissus and Echo, but it focuses on a different kind of love and its destruction. The myth of Narcissus and Echo is a warning about neglecting those around you for becoming so self-obsessed with yourself. The tale of Narcissus and Echo is a story often used with the word narcissism, as the word itself is derived from the myth of the boy who fell in love for his own reflection. Narcissus was a boy who was very handsome, and because he was so handsome, he denied every woman who ever fell in love with him. The gods vowed that he would never grow to old age as long as he always recognized himself. However, there was a nymph named Echo, and she was also beautiful. She was cursed to only repeat the last words spoken to her, and therefore, they could not communicate. Narcissus once told her she was the most beautiful nymph he had ever seen, and she fell in love with him. However, one day, while Narcissus was knelt down to have a drink, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection in the water, and realized that this reflection was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He cast aside Echo and became engrossed in staring at his own reflection, not realizing it was himself. Since Narcissus had cast everyone away who had ever loved him in favor of his reflection, the gods cursed him to never be able to have anything he loved. Narcissus vowed to never leave the side of the water and said that he would die with the one he truly loved. However, because he was sitting there, he could not get food and water, and therefore he would die of starvation. Because he no longer recognized himself in his reflection, he began to age and eventually died of old age, actually, because Echo would bring him food and water from the side of the river. Echo, who mourned the loss of her only love, laid down beside the river where he died and starved herself until she too died. The lesson of this myth is conveying a warning not to become too self-absorbed that you lose sight of what is important to you and those you love. Narcissus became so prideful of his own appearance, he didn't think he was good enough for anyone else, or anyone else was good enough for him. He only decided that he would love Echo because she was more beautiful than anyone he had ever seen, and as soon as he saw himself in the reflection, he ignored Echo, only caring about himself. His narcissism caused him to die, and also hurt and caused Echo to die as well. The lesson also teaches about realizing self-worth, as Echo spent her life devoted to taking care of Narcissus, who didn't really care for her at all. Sometimes it's easy to take something you love for granted, until you lose it, and this is also a common theme in the myth about King Midas. The myth of King Midas is a commonly taught lesson about greed in today's society. King Midas was a king who already had everything a king could want. He was rich, he had a large castle, and a beautiful daughter who he loved. Even though he already had everything to make him happy, he believed that his happiness came from the amount of gold he owned. Midas once stumbled upon one of Dionysus's, the god of wines, satyrs taking a nap in the king's famed garden. He instantly recognized the satyr and offered him a place in the palace, and for his kindness, he was offered one wish from Dionysus. The king wished that he could have the ability to turn anything he touched into gold. Dionysus urged the king to reconsider the wish, warning him that it was more of a curse than a wish. But the king insisted that this would make him the most happy. In the morning when he woke, he was excited to see that his wish had come true and began turning everything to gold. However, when he went to eat, he found that everything he touched turned to gold, so he couldn't eat. When he drank, same thing happened. Finally, his daughter came to hug him, and she too turned to gold. Filled with despair at the loss of his daughter, King Midas prayed to Dionysus to wash away his gift. The god heard him and felt horrible for him, instructing him to wash the gift away in the river Patroclus. When he returned from the river, everything he had touched was renewed. From then on, he spent his life sharing his fortunes with others when he could. The lesson of King Midas's myth is to teach us to recognize happiness where you already have it and not get too greedy. Midas did not realize the happiness he already had with his daughter and mistook it instead for gold. He did not heed the warning of Dionysus that his wish was a curse, and he began touching everything he could, becoming extremely greedy with his gift. He only realized that his happiness was his daughter when he lost her. So first I discussed the lesson of love using the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and then we moved on to the lesson of narcissism using Narcissus and Echo, and finally we ended with the lesson of greed using King Midas's myth. Greek mythology stories taught humanity valuable life lessons and have been passed down through generations to teach the same thing. In conclusion, Greek mythology remains relevant in our lives, even from 2,700 years ago, and continues to stay in the forefront of our minds when we learn valuable lessons about survival and humanity itself.